las tango zone reserva. Eso. Tamalota Toman some delay. Use.
So I would like to address my tragedy to all of you.
Tene tatra Kazan Gumo de la ne ging on to negative the la Kaji shake on those on. Ta Kazan Gunda Chitu Pachi, Chupa Damata inside you, Tenda Songs. Tayang Kaji share the Tabdendo Chigoyat and the Chitang Yosari in a young Tayang Tito Jimbe, Tabdeki Musica, John Mason, China Balang share the Zoya, Rewa Chimbo, the Pinto Chimbuchi Yungris, and the Rewa Shokimbo and Jananga Yojimari, Majaro Nans sharing.
And so it was yesterday at the last minute. Yesterday, I think it was 7 p.m. when Nonchila asked me to say something to you today. And so I think today I'm going just to say something simple. And I didn't have the time to prepare anything more elaborate. And so I think that you don't expect to get anything very useful or beneficial from my talk, but anyhow, please don't have that expectation.
Chitan Kazanga Nawang Kong the Kidishi Gondo, Kedjan number than the Kidishi Gondo song. That Tikalanga Chargi, the category, Yeshika Lagan, Kong number Sunkinas at Langan, Ronnie Mahet Sasi, Young Tip Pat de Langan Latchi, Koranzo, Capture Chetang, the throw Tetang the Soya, Musindo, Donan Lab they were going in the air. The Soga Soso Gangene, Jima Mayim, you want to skin about Shiba in a there's a pink on a Hakumadis.
And so, in fact, Non had already asked me to say something to you about translation and share some of my experience. So I was before, not on yesterday, but before that, and I had been thinking about that for a little bit. And when he asked me, actually, I was just arriving in a church. And so when he asked me that, I was there, and I thought, well, it's something that seems to correspond to where I am now. So I need to say something and share some things that that are specific about the fact of translating and how we should bring something that corresponds to that is meaningful, and then bring some that brings a chord in the mind of those to whom I'm going to talk.
Chetang Tonsin the China, Tonsin number some the China Tambote Kasnanga Pula, the naked just kept just thinking the sort of PM is like Nenga Chimbo Kandimi or Check Tang. Tene Niba de any Puja kept Homa Puja kept jet the Tikap Telaya, kept jet the Zoka, Gibatan, Kranso, Jotang, and Nambaka in Tetang. Then is somebody that any Yugyal singing data, Yugyal the kept their Karina, Matola Tangi, but chatting Karimi, that tea calling around some Jacari over the shares.
And so I wanted to organize what I'm going to say here in 3 parts. First, I would like to address the importance of translators in Tibet, so in the history of Tibet. And secondly, I would like to talk a little bit about how and what is a translator and what is translation. And thirdly, I would like to talk a little bit about the requisites, or what is absolutely necessary for a translator to have, whether he translates orally or in a written.
Then the Tankamanga or Chetan Junction and the letter thinking so the Suina. And Lega Karen go to buy in a Soso Telaya, Yang Yoa. And Pemasik kitchen windy. Lega Tela Yang Yoa, Lega Tela Soso Gami Yutsawa Yola, Lega Karechina Yang Asope, Lam Loya, Kangen Tina, Donate Pe kitchen windy, turning us Homa Book. Loza to Huma couple Loza to la Pula Pemasik cutting Kadichi, Jim Saint he go at the days.
And so, starting with what translators were and did back in Tibet, And so I think the first thing that is important is the interest and the passion for when you're translating. And this really interest and great motivation is required because translating is not something that is easy. And so when problems arise on the way, then it is important to remember that and to keep this motivation, keep that interest, this passion alive. And so it is for that reason that I would like to share a little bit about how important translators were in Tibet.
Then the Karsing also Tangma Pula, Pug Caps, Chijan Chasong Depsinda, Sonzing Gambo Konamba Kablaya, then Pula, then Yigeti, Jag, Nachita Sopula Magia, and Gotso by the Konamba, then Chija. Sonzing Gang Kabla and then goes on and Tasa de Think Kabla, the Nepu Kebjata so Yajetan pe Techeoris. Then the Karse Tikavlaya, Puk Kebjata so Karse Meva in Baina, then it Tatang also Pulaya, Namba Sanji Betemba singing Chita, Tatang Nyamnichiata, Soso Masega Kangesea Mamuji, you devate, Naso Takapoki, Puk Lotava Kase Meva in Baina, then Tikata, Yicha so Kanja. Last about the danger last one, which in Atoga, Jame Bachayoris. And then that pick up lots of it so famous cutting Chimbachayoris.
And so in Tibet, the translation work started at the times of the kings Chitonbeten and Sonten Gampo. And so at the time of both of these kings, then the translation work from Indian treatises in Sanskrit text started. And so at the time of Sonten Gampo, the translation work started. And then during the time of Chitonbeten, it was improved and further developed. And if at that time, and it's for that reason that today we have all this literature about Buddhism that is available, and if at that time there were no translators at all, then Tibetan Buddhism, as it has been transmitted through Tibet, and all the tools and all the techniques that it provides to help us solve the problems that we encounter during our lives wouldn't exist, and we wouldn't have the great collections of the Kangyur and Tengyur either.
In the Tajer, the Sonzing Gambo Kabla, the Bogolota to Yang Kong number music, Dabjerk, Nazota, Flopsindo, Lobdanda was Segorota, Kebjerk, Flopdanda was the Kayoma, the Ine and Tickups that Zone, and it Chija of the Koranka, Lota. In Ton Chimbo, huge in Nanke, Benangaso Lacha in the that Chija Koranka, Kazonwa, Jatang up Jatang, Sumchi Yemi, Yoba Tina in Sumchetang, and Lachaga Rangon Yonzo, but the Lozava Jig, the Lachano, the Yon the Pit in Be Maziga, Nengachim with its theories.
Something of the role.
Really, something of real.
And so at the time of the king Sonzeng Gampo, of course, there were no schools or places where translators could train, and there was nothing that existed at the time. But he still he started the training of translators, and when he did, he gave them a lot of importance and gave them a lot of put them on a prominent position in society at that time, and just to give, and he also gave salaries that were extremely high. Just to give an idea, the king had about 100 or so bodyguards and people taking care of his security, and just to pay one single translator, he took the wage of 30 of his bodyguards. And so that's how much important translation was for him and how much he valued the work of translators.
The Tapemazi take up Sayan, Musi, the Lozava Solaya, Korans of the Chentonga, Man, Musika, Korans, Man Musi oris, Man Karisina, Jitinji Max in the Tioris, Kaisna, the Lozava to Someba in Baina, the knee, Matsoka, Najik Lobjongia, Sanjiga song to Soyan Matsoka, Hakote Yomaris, the name the Koranga, Jitinga Max in the Musika Chenton than the Tioris.
And just as much they have been given a situation of preeminence in the society, they have also been given a name at that time that reflected that importance that the king, with which the king saw the translators, and they were called the eyes of the world, which is to show that without these translators, there was no way for people to study or to read or to know about Buddhism, and there was no way for anyone to have access to the Buddha's teachings. And so for that reason, they were called the eyes of the world.
근데 이제 다 가서 다들 내가 그 capture 그 당가 조정 탄지 요르와 다 디값 capture 그 정탄 쓰다니다 돌바이나 근데 다들 값 capture 그 정탄 써야 돼서 만냠이 좀 요리때 이나야 아 디가 가서 밸류세 거와 다 디가 내내다네 정탄데 가서 다들 capture 막 인다 그 쓰고 요는다 맨나다 간단 가서 다들 그 디가 정탄데 땅이 총되게 요리스.
And so if we look at how much value, how much importance was given to the translators at the time, and if we look at how much importance people give to translators today in today's world, then we can obviously see that there has been some decline, so that people don't value so much translators as they did before. But whether people give that value or not, it doesn't really change the fact that there is really a great value in the translation. I feel that way, at least.
대행이 가서 지난번 capture 있는 때 시고야 돼 뺏기지 뭐 있을 때는 등산 capture 망고지 가르치는 샘쇼 차로 요리 당 한마 capture도 빼면서 텐던도 다 등산 capture도 정상 찍으면 대행이 당아 capture 제트서 말이 상야 같은데 샘고 손나 용서들이 이나야 가서 그 capture 그 정상이 땡땡 거 한마 요만 나이 다다 창거 요리 근데 디 나야 샘쇼 차면 와다 문트는 던져줘야 돼 빼면서 내가 첨부레스.
And yes, and so you who are training as translators or are translators, it's very important for you to keep this in mind, because otherwise you could be discouraged by the fact of wanting to be translated, thinking, well, before the translators were so much valued and they were really put in considered to be very important. Nowadays, people don't really care about what translators do or not. And so this is something that could come to your mind, but you could have that feeling. But even though you should not you should not fall in thinking like that, because the same value that translators provided in the past is actually the same thing that the translators of today's world are providing for their own readerships. And so because of that, you should always see the real value, whether people give a value or not, it's something different, but you should see the value and never be discouraged.
산접 선바당 드바트바 던리스는 상노는 상노지 땅네 드네 대잠직 capture도 기침보다 계속 capture도 가게 같이 자요 바데 초로요 말이스 다 이내양아 곰반이 첼로라 마토네 아니 다 첼로 그 자카 만다발라 만로네 지 소존 로카라 오다 capture도 단다 기침보 맨네 다네 그 capture도 제 치데 데마 요고야다 capture도 내가 침보 임바데 다 니선 통근도 근데 인디 친남바 그네다네 벨로스는다 정탄도 다 네네지나 저소가 나노라 만로네 드니 통야던 리야시.
And so as for myself, before, when I was in the monastery, it's true that I was reading and I had access to all the texts from the Kangyur, Tengyur, etc. I did study quite a lot. But at that time, I did not think that this was thanks to the translators, or I did not recognize the value and the importance of translators in making all those texts available to me. And I didn't think how much difficult the translation work was. I didn't feel that way because it was not obvious to me. But afterwards, when I left the monastery, when I went to other countries and other places, and then I was in situations where I really realized how much important and how much precious translation is, and how much we have to be precise with words in order to be sure that we are understood in the correct way, etc. And so because of that, then I was able to see the real value of translation work. And so I think that in order to value translation, you have to go out of your previous situation, and then only the value of translators will come to you. You will be able to see.
Capture number ngaso ta hama phog capture la rung than sadan tang san capture khurang so capture tamjin la ya rung than yo ma ge zge yo na da min na da kan da dong ji dan ne rung than chen bo de nen ga chen bo jing ngaso capture number la thog yo ri chi xian khen da capture ni ta phachil da won da wo ri sta koni nen ga ye ma da wo ka se chi xian khen de ke ani capture ya bo ji ma ba yin na chi xian khen khurang bo gi dan ne ka se ya bo ji xie yo ya tani loma ta yin da go tu ma ro sta capture de ha jang nen ga chen bo ri That nenga chenpo yimba de ngaso capture number ga chorgo uri ma to ba ka yang gari resena ta hienkin lama korang la ji xetang dan korang ge ji xetang de da yimin de de zo samo dan ne so so ka gang joro yo wa de samo zo ma dang ba yin ba yin na de yang pe mesi ke yin ge ta nyen kin de zo lama gi ta go yo ma ro de ye ge je go yo na ye ge de ka ma pe de korang zo go yo ma ri de ta korang zo ngaso mungbin song sa de ka se na so so gang kin jor sa ge yor de cha de yo de ta de so ge samo tong dang da de so la peju tan dan kare yemi de shik go ya de pe ne ga chen boris ka se te ma hi ba yin na ta de ne nga ge ji so so ge gang do ba yo ba de na yin ji xie de ba yin ba yin na ko to yin da go yo do mo mo do ta da ma dang ba yin na de ne pe de so yang hola chen bo da nin ka chen bo shu cha de yo de 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 ba pe ma se ge song tong go ya de pe ne ga chen bo de sha se
And so yes, and so yes, and so when you're translating, also we need to see how much important we need to be aware of the importance of the translation work itself. Because if we think that it is only the one who is teaching who takes all the responsibility for the meaning to be correctly understood by the listeners or by the readers, then it is taking part of the situation out of the picture, because of course this is not something that can be perceived by those who are listening to a teaching or reading the translation in the book. But for the translator, it's extremely important to be aware of how the people who are listening or reading are actually thinking, and he needs to be aware about how they see things in order to be able to adapt his translation to them. Otherwise, if he just translates without taking into account the reader or the listener at all, then there's a great risk that he says many things and people don't understand anything of what has been said. And so because of that, the translator, it's not only the teacher who has the responsibility for that, whose responsibility, who has something to do with the fact that the people understand, but the translator himself also participates in that. And what he should do is to be aware of what the readers, how the readers think and what is their background, because otherwise then the teacher can be extremely good, but what he says won't be understood at all.
Lobda tanda ke ta capture ko lomzna tanda chawne tikap sa ta thomar maddi with kabla ya khong tani pe mas ek zamni chene capture ko lobda lan ronghi ko mad so ya sada ganda go do chachin kare chong go do khong so temba tanda shuji na yori tino ni ta chetan chachin mangbo ji yob no ne cho chachin nga da wo ji ta capture ya tangbu khong ya dibu kabla capture to nenga chenbu cha yor wa capture de ya dibu kabla mad so chachin nga chang go yo zo nga chang go ya da shi yoris.
And then at the time of the king Trizon, So he established this translation school that is called Graduate Lobening. And so this was a school for translators to be trained. And at the very beginning, he started this school with a batch of 7 Tibetan students. And he really cared very much about what was required for them in order to be accepted or to start to become trained. And so he kind of put down, he decided what were the requirements for someone who was to become a translator. And out of many things that he saw, he put forward 5 main requirements that were necessary for him to see in those he was recruiting to become translator.
근데 차진조 남방안은 다 부대야 디버가라 아니 릴은 나차 맹긴게 고고요레스 근데 니바테 아니 가스나 왕볼라 좀 맹긴 아야 왕볼라 좀 요바예는 깨져 터마로 깨져야다 얘게 줘야다 터마로 근데 릴은 나차 맹긴데 아니 왕볼라 좀 맹긴 근데 로렉 페마스 타보 용이야 로르바스 타오 메바이나 양 깨데 줘 터마로 로렉 타보 용기 근데 덴시 템보 용기 예바들 덴시 템보 용기 근데 아바들라 뉴리다 두리유 등이다 디 차치 넘버 something 니버드 창고 디 차치 제 마상 바이나 근데 캡처지야 그 디르바 나나 추고요 말이지.
And so the first requirement was that the person was completely healthy, did not have any sickness. And then the second one was that the person did not have any problem with his sense organ, because if you have a failing sight, for example, then you won't be able to translate, or failing ear, etc., hearing. And so this was the first 2 requirements that he decided. And then the third one was that the person needed to be very sharp. So to have a very sharp intelligence. And that also is required, because otherwise you can't really translate in a very detailed and appropriate way. And then the fourth requirement was to have a very stable memory, and to be very to have a good recalling of what was said, what was taught. And the fifth one was to be someone who is able to put a lot of effort, and who is able to go through a lot of hardships in order to work, to have this ability. And so these last 3 were absolute requirements, and they were absolutely mandatory. And because without these last 3 requirements, then a good translators cannot be produced.
And then nga ba ting newly that tani newly demba singi nga ba di ya yores den ta chi nambala ta tangbo de tangbo yimba ta chata chang ge yore di ne ya ta newly demba singi de nga so ta dangsan ge di so de la ya capture la ji ta kang yin mang wo ji ta yang chetan ye jo ya tang ke jo ya kare ne ya kang ye yo gang he la yang ma ye chen tong tang so so ge le ka mang wo ji la kang ye dong ne mang wo ji je go ye ste de newly de pe ne ga chen bo ji thong do ste de tan di cha chen ga de nge she go ya de yin sirwa.
And so, out of the 5 requirements that I was describing, the fifth one was to be able to provide a lot of effort and to accept a lot of difficulties during one's work. And so this, I think it is important, because in today's day, then a translator is going to face a lot of difficulties. People don't value so much their work, and then during the process of translation as well, it's very difficult and very demanding. And so because of that, I think it is something very important, and so it is something that you must take into account and think about. And it was in order to reach the point of seeing the value of translators, because there are people who have all these qualities and fulfill these 5 requirements. And it was for that reason that I wanted to cite, to quote those requirements.
Tadi kap sekep je dia cacing number sam chang ni ya ta drabje ke di zenda la kasih ko lobda la ya let sabe jila tani 가르치기 요리스는 tani 딱 가르치고래 딱기 넘버 넘버 3지고니 tani 하회 디 지스 tani 다 롭다는 니스 쓰기 요리스.
And so once a candidate who had all these 5 requirements was found, then he was brought to the school of translation. And once he arrived there, and then he was put on at 3 different levels of tests, 3 stages of testing. And at the end of these, then only he would formally start to train.
tani 딱기 넘버 3거는 딱기 넘버 당보때 론쟁거 넘버 세요스다 론쟁거 넘버 세디 베나 디소카마 다 코란조 로빈랑게 tani lopro ta ya damya jo kanaloni lochu chikpa yembate tani karma che kanalola sholoka tani ta kachi no chi te yo na te karma ta karma ngani chepa karma che kanalola ani sholoka chama lonzen chikpa che thundo mondo ta ki che che yo stand lonzen ga ramba ta ki se ji yo res.
And so out of these 3 these 3 tests that the candidate had to go through, the first one was the test of memorization. And so when this candidate reached this Lobenling and he was tested at the beginning, he was given a certain amount of shlokas, of verses to learn by heart, and was given 10 minutes. And so he, by the end of these 5 to 10 minutes, the candidate was supposed to have learned by heart, memorized, and the entirety of all these shlokas, just like all the other candidates were expected.
tani tagi ramba ni batela drawat link ramba segi yoris ta pena lopto koran su tana ma ta tisu che tangla ani drawat ji ma tang yoris drawat de ma tang di lin de ani tisu karma ka che kan na lin de ta phong do lin de ka sabji ka che no chikpa chikchen yung do mo do wo te tagi zo yoris de drawat link ye yap se de che ya yoris ni batela.
And then the second test was the test of the question and answers. And so what happened is that the question was given to all the candidates, and after a certain amount of time, like between 5 or 10 minutes or something like that, that time was set. And at the end of this time, then an answer was expected from the candidates, and the answer should be in correspondence with the expectations of the teachers of this school, and the level of the answers, whether they were very shallow or very profound. All of this was analyzed, and then the students were divided according to the results they had obtained.
tani necha sambatela tani necha ye yap se da necha ji ma khorang so te ne ti hipju zo ya ta ti necha ti ka de necha ye yap zo ya ti cha yo res ti ta necha de ma te on ka la ti su che ka na no ta necha de la ye yap ta je thou ndo mo do njobo je thou ndo mo do ta ta ki che yo res te te pe nenga chen bo che ta ke la cha yo res
necha sa karena
necha pe na ta nga so khorang zo necha je pe na ta bobe che so necha je amang sam no ta ka de se ji ma te ji yo ro.
And then the third test was testing their assessment. And so a situation was presented to them. And then they also had, like before, a certain amount of time during which they were supposed to assess the situation and then give their evaluation of that situation. And they were supposed to be able to give it on time. And then the shallowness or profundity of their assessment was then reviewed by the teachers.
근데 당가 쪽 겹자도 쪽 된다고 제 차진데 다 나하고 그때라 겹자도 총 받는 제네네 겹자 로정데 때요리스. 근데 이제 다 망고 제가 상노나 가래서는 다 티값 겹자도 좀 그냥 지왕하마라 빼면서 가세고랬다 초망보 사이야 왔다. 근데 고소 라힌 남주들 쉬우지 첨부차는 즉 산첩 선바당 산제세야 깨져 지요로다. 3년 내비서만 지동다 지로 태동이 망보지 요리스. 다 된도 이제 마동 바이나 땅에 가서 산 파산노 땅 바이나 디값을 캡자도서라 코소라 당보게 예자가 시 삼노 동당다 예자가 남치우세고 다르바 야보 용이 디샤브지라 아니 강에 휴지 배촌 휴지 제네 타마들라 드니 다 보고 캡자도서 그 까팅 망보지 조르타야한테 삼노 당바 힘바이나 드니 가서 캡자가 랑타이링이네 초롱고 요레스 캡자싱이 강에 같이 여바 디드네 강에 잡조들라 정대 같이 동요바티 초르타고 요레스 데 마도바가 다 보바가 삼노 동당제 요레 오 다스 코란좀 허마니 차차왔던 데서 가서던 다그 말이세 삼노진 코르차다 근데 런텐데 초고 말이스 근데 다 더소그 토라 삼노 당바이나 베 캡자데 런텐 침보다 볼테카스 차데요레스
And then so it is only on when they passed these three tests that the students were trained, and after that they started to translate. And so about their the translators in general, people, especially Tibetans, have this idea that, well, these were special beings. They were they are emanations of Buddhas or Bodhisattvas, so people with they must have done something very special in past lives, and because of that, they have this great ability now to be able to translate. And so, if we have this, then we are going to think about translators in a given way, but without thinking about the translators in that way, and then leaving out this idea that they might be special persons, either emanations of Buddhas or Bodhisattvas, but we really just think about what they did, how they trained, then we have to see that at the beginning, of course, they were chosen because they had specific abilities, and they were intelligent and had good memory, etc. And so they had intellectual capacities that were selected on that basis. But then afterwards, when they trained, they still had to undergo a lot of difficulties, a lot of a lot of hardships, and then just in order to be trained. And after that, when they translated as well, it was not something very easy, and they really put a lot of effort and a lot of and they accepted to go through all these difficulties in order to produce the translation that we can see as the result now. And so if we think about this process, how they trained, how much it was difficult for them, and what they had to go through in order to make a translation, then we start to see the value of these translators and the translations that they have produced. Because otherwise, if we just think that they are people different and that they are Buddhas or Bodhisattvas manifestation, etc., then on that basis, we cannot possibly see any value in them.
근데 인데 가서 법안 나로 가르치나봐 녜시야지라 법아가 나로라 라마지가 남타 저기 오는다 라마지가 남타 시에게 오는다 가래이네야 드니 코서 가서 말렌 대비게 삼노지 야요레스 라마데게 좀 트라이오리 라마데 당본이 지 차요리 니바 차요레스 망보지 시행데 라마데가 남타 로네 드니 소소 먹게 삼노지서 때다 라마가 남타니 보데 베드 코란 카하리 차디 드니 지가서 초반으로 무시 때토 말레스 데니 다 보바가 남타 트다이는다 가래이네 지 사미알렌데 바 망보지 조야바가 드니 니스 라마데게 니네다 네게 마데게 강게 잡조다 마데게 토모마이 비체치데 나솔라 초마다 데게 강게라 보바 망보 휴지 요레스타.
And also something else I would like to share is that Tibetans have this habit or this tradition that whenever they're writing the life story of a teacher or a master, whether they're actually talking about it or whether they're writing about it, they have this habit of making it so that he is extraordinary, that he goes far beyond the realm of what is human. And so when they're explaining and saying, oh, this happened to this teacher and that happened to this teacher, then they present it in such a way that it seems that these teachers are completely beyond the society in which they were living. And so because of this habit of writing down the namtar or the life stories of teachers, and then it ends up in a way that's becomes unrelatable for us, and then we can't be touched or feel that there's any value in that because it's something that is so completely different from us. So this is, generally speaking, something that is normal or usual in the Tibetan world.
Tati inju de lang ta tambo de tane bog na lo la ta ji lo za ba de zo ge rong ten ta ta ha ba de chi de zo ge lo za ba de zo la rong ten ta dang dang bo ngene dong ji ta ni ya ta ka se go ri capture de zo pe ma sen rong ten chen bo yin be ge ta ko de ta ji ko ram du bo kan chong ma so de na ba so la hia de ta nga ni ba de la ane hung je 보지 깨져 저 요한 티갑지 요 얘기 jortang dan jordan kola raps ji shegins.
And so this is in order to complete what I wanted to share about the value that the Lotsawas and then the translators had in Tibet. Yes, and how much important translations and translators are. And so I'm sorry that my talk has been a little bit confused and was not really well organized, but that was for this first one. Now coming to the second one, I would like to talk about the actual work of translations. And so when translation is done, how happens the process of translating from one language to the other.
ni ba de nga so ngama phu kanjor dan tenjor do so karse gore ta bola man jor che ba la jortang de nga san tikap de da tikap la ya jortang de zo lo ba bo zo zong chen ne pa chi jor ta me ban ra wo chen ngaran chogan do karisna da da ge lo ba bo zo zong chen ne jor mata ba jimsin la tin ne tani ta da ti su te la ya tani 보바 그 제소가 나오게 맞아 포모 요러 왔다 배는 보여기 시집에 통보 많이 베게 지용 그 마망지 요러 더소게 간제든 로바 있는 과타바 다 디갑 디다 디갑라 양고 저탄 데라 가르스나 친 통보다 드니 동저 많이 봐 책랑 땅 저야 줬던데 같이 차요 사리스 근데 인디 양디 내가라 띠네 드니 다 간제 그 땡도 조야 아니 상상게 뒤솔라 맞아 포모도 저거 로바이네야 고마타바 양 난지라 효 첨보 장 마타기도 저거 로네야 야보 고마타바 더 차요리스.
And so and then also before I think that when it comes to how translation work was done in Tibet, I think that is, of course, there are these great collections like the Kangyur and Tengyur that were translated, and where they were translated, I think that the translation that were done at that time did not really take into account the reader and what would be what would correspond to him or not. And the reason for which I can say that is because if the reader had been taken into consideration, then normal people, like people from the Tibetan society who are not extremely well educated and did not make a lot of studies, they should be able to understand it. But obviously, it's not the case. When you take Buddhist text and you show it to lay people who are not educated specifically for these texts, then they are not able to understand. And there are a few reasons for that. First, words that are used as it's a very high words or very elaborate words that are used. And then secondly, words were translated for a lot of times literally, instead of translating the meaning. The words were translating instead of the meaning for many times. And so the resultant situation is that now if you present a text to a person who knows Tibetan, who is Tibetan, but is not formally educated in Dharma, then he won't be able to understand.
Jamsin they Karjina that the Georgia city that Jamsin check the any Tetaki chinking de la then Pentata then it pet seen Tombo Kaza Chunjo Koransoge or some Nigan Jawatola Penat Hidayan and das Hidache or what I Georgia Loza chick Kujon and Pentalate and it Pentata de Capsulaya penna chija songzeng gambo ga kabla ina penta ta chechon ba number some see yoris penta tan chunga penta tan jengbo penta ta chenbo lo pen chenbo se ta tani tangbo penta ta chunga de yege de yangsu zo ba de jor ani this is la penta tan jengbo de la te ani khong ga hida che penta ta jengbo de hida che sa ba de la penta ta chenbo de la te ne ani tama penta ta chenbo de hida che ne tama thagyu chama che sa ji la tani chija da ninda tani ta tinjor yang ta barin do mando wa tani ta ki zone tani thama tin lamba wo yoris tani ta khoso ge jonghin ge ti cheso je yorwa ti cheso te famous chin thombo ge ganza chonjong indi tani ta longking ge mamang kima ge samno ge thola yang shira ge da samno ta matha bi jinsin tin ne ani tikap sa ta njor to so yak to te khorang so la pa ne ani ziya ba ta phachi yin sa ri sam dos.
And also then translations when they were yes, and so if we try to analyze what brought this situation, then it is most likely because the people who were involved in the translation process were people who were extremely highly educated, like Lozawas, and then the translators themselves, and then the people who reviewers also, they all were people who were highly educated and highly specialized, and because of that, then they didn't adapt so much the translations to the readers. And for example, at the time of Songtsen Gampo, there were 3 different levels of translators: the lesser, the middling, and the higher translators. And so when also translation was first done, then the lesser translator would make a first draft. He would translate from beginning until the end the text for the first time, then give it to the middling translators to review. He would check it, improve it, take out the mistakes. And then once he was done, he would give the translation to the higher translator, who would do the same. And then he would also analyze the translations and check whether the meaning was accurately transmitted or not, and then decide whether or not the translation was qualitative or not, was of good quality. And then in the end, decide that the translation was, once the whole process was done, then the translation was finished. And so when we look at all the agents or the people involved in the translation work, all of them belong to a part of the society that was extremely well educated and that dealt with very specialized concepts and ideas, etc. And because of that, they didn't really take into consideration what would be understood or not by the general society, the general population. And because of lacking to do so, then the translations that were produced then are very difficult to understand by the general public.
Ta tanda indi ti jamsin le tine ani ta ti da ti kabla ani chi kasi monastery se go ta chi dabho ge so ti su yo ba tani so so ga nama dang tani lega to so la sam tang ma gong kin to so ka ta ti ta na lo jong chin ne lo dan lo journey ani chi dang sabota tang sabota de ko tha yo ri si ina ya ta kanje ge te so tani mamang chi ma ga na lo che so ga na lo la chini longking da pe nyong nyong cha yo ri skalsina ko so ga lo na ko thu yo ma ste ko ma ta di ta lo din ne lo re po pa che so ga na lo re la kanje de thama chi longking da yo ri sta te ka sa ram ro 샤핑이 치드 로우요네 마도바게 간저도 섭답고 ngochine lo thuyo ma jimsin karsina kon jor de pen thabo chatsadi tidena lo matab charis den de tang aso pobe cheso na na wen roina aso pobe cheso na roina kanjar tenjar de so khangba lagana na shamde ya madoba게 섭답 근 디시 chine yotubo ma jimsin karsina jor de tha ta ne ne ten chade yoris di jimsin le tine digi shukyin de tade so na la kanjar tenjar de tani cheso ga na lo tachap chimbon dong matab de nenga de cha song ris.
And so because of that, the only person who had access to these texts that were translated were people who were living in monasteries, who didn't have to think or do many things about their families, who didn't have to work, and who could spend their whole time just thinking and studying about these texts and their meaning. And so they needed to spend very long periods of training in order to be able to understand the meaning that was conveyed by these translations. But otherwise, the general population was unable to understand anything. And the general population didn't read either those translations specifically because they didn't understand what was written there. And when it comes to how much these translations are read for the general public, once a year, people usually gather traditionally to read the Kangyur, and then they spend a certain amount of time just by reading. But besides reading it as a ritual, in order to considering it as a ritual to have some effect in that way, no one was actually in the general public reading the Kangyur and Tengyur, so those translations, just in order to understand the meaning and to study. And the reason for that is, like I said, that the way it was translated was too hard, or it was it was not at the level of those of the general public. And so it is because the translations were too difficult to read, and that today in the Tibetan society, reading the text, these translations is not done, or it never took off.
다 근데 저 상황 저 야고지 하고바이나 근데 가서 그 게정킨도 저거 이게 정킨도 저거 다 간다지 줘보는 가서 그 줘야 돼 가리치디 수기치디 가르치는 job yoris. ता ngacho joya de decoration chi de job yo marwa. Ta pena ngacho jorne tem hing jewo chi zone sham ya ya de ngacho lega marwa. Ta te lega na pe lega de giba jamsi chada ki merwa. Ta ngacho joya de kare joro yoris na mola pinto wa checho no na kachi na chat ya de na go yorwas. Tende indi jamsi tel tine ngacho capture de zo ga maung bala samo tong ga ya kasna. Nga ga jor ge joti checho na go thu no ma do. 제초는 챕터근도면도 가서 책 배주 땅에 책이 드니 제초는 용다린도 만두 딱 더서선 어떤 거야 돼 하쟁은 딱 캡처제 그 문이 빼개체 버리셨어.
And so this is something that we should really think about carefully, because when we translate, we have to think about who are we translating for? What are we translating for? Is it something that we are doing just in order to, after having translated, print it in a beautiful book and put it as a decoration somewhere? Most likely, this is not the motivation that we have. We don't want to translate in order just to produce a beautiful object, because otherwise it wouldn't be of any help. What we want to translate for is to be able to benefit people in our communities, right? And so our translations must have that effect. They must be read and must benefit the readers for whom we are translating. And so because of that, when we are translating, we must ask ourselves, will the readers for whom I'm translating going to understand this? Is this word something that is commonly known and accepted by by people usually or not? Will they understand if I write like this and like that? And so having this kind of consideration is extremely important.
배나가서 등산가 총바지나 다 마케팅 게 계지 시에나로 마케팅 게 나노 계지 시에 바이나 가서 총바지나 잘라데 쫑고요나 당부 잘라데 종사근 허려들 잘라데 로운도문도 코솔 고운도문도 긴콘도문도 코솔게 잘라데 배주 땅 노반도문도 다 되게 삼노 땅 거야 배내가 전부 차요라스 다가 나이 가서 치신킹 있는데 캡저 있는데 직과 직전 가서 그 줘야 돼 가른데 코솔 땅은 줘고도 책 가래 배주 땅 고도 조사가 요르도솔라 강에 가른도 코솔테스 강에 세알 책 땅가서 지 타니 있는데 다지 요게 수저리 있는데 간르지 고도 배나 땅가 수저리 있는 양가서 배나 로랍지 요로 제너레이션 요로 다 제너레이션 될 책 배나가 si generation se ando ta generation se ko marab la sang da manda ma mundu pena long up je tang rukje slip ding de so ko zo ga chai pe ju tang da ko zo ga che so ga sang tong tang kha yori ta yonji de so ga yang koran zo chai pe ju tang da chjer ga pe ju tang da so be de koran kha yori then di ta choran ga ke je 다다 게 줘야지 다 드럼 니시 짜게 놓은 가서 저거 요라 저 사대 이제 데려와 다 되니 저랑 그 저게 저게 롱킹데 설 타겟 설 지기요 롱 업젝트는 지기요 다 다다 연지 그 제서 놓는 지기요 다 연지 그 제서 놓는 지기요는 양차 배주 단다 가래고 더소다 빼 머세가 가서 내가 침보지 디점생을 때는 가서 예약 그걸 봐서 다소 가서 강나 보고 다 깨져서 럼바 총고는 예약 지탐만 다 그 럼바 지요와 디고 예약 때빼 깨져라 내가 침보 차요네
And so when we are, yes, and so if we, just to give an example, if we are in the context of marketing or wanting to sell something and create a new object, a product that will be sold, the first thing that we need to think about is whether there is any market for that object. Is there any buyers, any potential buyer for what we want to create or not? And then we want to see whether the community where we want to sell that object, is there a need for that object or not, with this new product or not? And of course, this is very important for someone who wants to make business. But in our case, whether we are teaching the Dharma or whether we are translating, it's also the same. We need to make an assessment, clear assessment of what is the situation of those for whom we are translating or those to whom we are teaching. And then we need to assess very clearly what is this intention, what kind of vocabulary are they using, and how, what we want to translate, of course, and then to see whether if we translate this, is it going to solve a problem of the persons in that community or not? And if so, how, etc. And so all of this is very important to think about before we actually start translation. And then also, as for the vocabulary that we're going to use, we need to take into account the generation of the readers for whom we are translating. Of course, we are people from the 21st century, and so this is the basis on which we are working as translators. But then different generations are using different words, different expressions, different ways of talking, etc. And so we need to identify also what is our public. Do we want to talk to reach the generation? Do we want to reach the general public, or do we want to reach another generation? All of this needs to be very clearly set in our minds before we actually start to work as translators. And so I think it seems to me that this ability to assess the situation and assess the needs and assess what we're trying to do is really important for translators as well.
근데 점생에 때네 근데 참잖아 nga 조보도 속 라버리스 근데 보바도 속에 좀 바보도 빼면서 쪼요레스 가시나 반저시다 요 말이스 대망보지 드나니 대대선 랭고요 말이스 근데 법이저선은 대망발라 가오요 말이스 근데 신경요레스 nga sam노다는 참잖아 고소 라고요스 나저 대 줘야돼 좀 바보 대 줘야돼 니 저쪽 마망기 치데 대 주문 왔으니 마망가 가발로그리스 다 대 줘야돼 가시나 소소동 캐바이만 소야다 빼 곡하고 색 빼면서 차고 몸주세로 냥아세한다도 진네 뭐 파파 남주 맞지마데 파고 소정 가나 간삼 제땡인도 고마타 붙는데 차노요 근데 yendaala ko matapena logo marwas logo ya jimsen ki merwas so pe matona ti jimsen tin ne tani bobo ge so ga nalo la dep jenghin so tani dep mandren ba ta dep so chungram ya bo meng ba te nenga chi te thu yoris tani ngama ga bogo samno tong da gari yoris na chang chabu ma yenda je o ko ga chak pe him bo pe ju tan chang chabu pe ju tan se tani tela pe rung ten chi bo ro ji ba koran so ge so ga nalo za ma do ma mo na ma ze de zang je ge lo chen ne de yorwas 대에 땅아서 은혜체나 법적으로 나눠서 뎁트서 마치서는 랭고나 네 망기마도 그 고토야지 차고 열었어. 근데 인디 더 소토라 빼면서 그 삼노 동고야 돼. 빼내가 정말 깨치나 뭐 깹저리나 다가래서 치나 뭐 차이님 뭐 차고 드네 빼 다루고 용든 담바 휴지 제바인 바이나 드네 망기마 고 마타 바인 바이나 드네 치나 뭐 조야 강에 휴지 잡야 돼. 펜도 마정 버리스. 근데 인디 더 소토라 빼내가 침보 리샤스.
And so sometimes when I talk with my Tibetan friends and we talk about the situation of the literature or modern Tibetan literature and Tibetan authors, usually I hear from those friends that Tibetan authors nowadays do not live well, they are not well paid, they all are very poor. And so it is the reality of that profession in the world, generally in Tibetan society. And but then when I hear that, what comes to my mind is, and what I answer to those friends is, well, those Tibetan authors, it's true that on one side we can say that Tibetans are not people who read a lot of books, and they do not like to read, they do not have the habits, and so because of that, books don't sell, and which makes Tibetan authors be poor and have very precarious situations. But at the same time, if we look at how Tibetan authors are writing, then it becomes clear all of a sudden, because it's obvious that from trying to read what the Tibetan modern authors are writing, it is clearly not tailored for the general public. It is not made for people to understand. If you look at modern Tibetan literature, it's full of very complicated words, full of metaphors and all sorts of very difficult rhetoric embellishments, etc., using a lot of all these things, and it makes so much so that even people who have a very good education sometimes have difficulty to understand it. And so people who are not well educated or didn't go through so much studies, of course they won't be understanding it. And because of that, if people don't understand what they're reading, then there's no reason for which people should buy books and read them. So it's completely normal that people don't buy books. So it's not the fault of the Tibetan habits of not reading, but it's because of the way that Tibetan authors write makes it impossible for the public to appreciate, to give any value, and then to buy the books and actually use it. And so it is for that reason that Tibetan authors don't publish well and cannot make a living because of that. Because for them, actually, this whole idea comes from the fact that, historically speaking, someone who was able to use very complex and very elaborate words was considered to be someone very intelligent and was very valued. People gave a lot of value to people who were able to speak very elaborate words and in a way that usually people could not understand, or very poetic and becoming obscure. And so modern Tibetan authors still keep this way of thinking in their minds and still consider that this is the example of what they should produce. And because of that, they completely ignore their readership or people who could be reading their works. And because of that, then their books won't sell, they won't be published properly, and they won't be able to live from publishing their own books. And it comes from that, not from the bad habits of Tibetan people. And so I think that this same reasoning could be applied also to translations, because let's say that if you write translations in a way that is complying with, in every possible way, with the rules of the language towards which you're translating, and you make it in a very elaborate way, use words that are extremely complex, etc., then we can't expect people to understand what they're reading, and so we can't expect people to benefit from it either.
And then the time that tirap damba pachir got that dabjer category, dabjer young the pachi tambo the pole in a soja hako made. So Asia no and dabjer young no the pachi tanshin the papa dabjer young the pachi inside sound. That tirap damba jeba yemin dabjer young than a song. That the so good nanola caresson yoris and a dabjer young and nanola. Then it dabjer say, take up that dabjers in the Pejutan or what you just in the Pejutan, dabjers in the Pejukajitan bodies and the Tikabla. Then that Tonda de co jogo Tonda Tagaran yoris, that day, Mataran Jantanga to Segura, that Tonda jersey, that take Joa de Matobaga, Tonda de Joyo, that suggests in the Pentabo Chasnorba. 딱 배는 Sanskrit 당 저거 책대 가래 이마 뒤책대 다가랑 마 저런데 돈다데 고 보베 고운도 뭐 보게스 저거 상노 당당들 이 야네 간자 된제 그 돈다데 마 저요 왔다 돈다데 다가랑 야네 때 요여라 얘나 양다 뒤가서 답저게 용도서 나노라 가래성 요리스나 이게 지금 마 저고요나 자동치 뭐 삼총고 요리스 자 돈다 삼총고 요리스 다 차진 삼총고 요리스 해 요리스.
And so the first work on the first treatise of translation, I'm not really sure about that, but I think that it was the first one in the whole of Asia. So at least in this first translation treatise in Tibetan was written about in the 7th or 8th century. And so at the time, the word that was used for translation was not translating the words or Yugyal, like we say now, but the words, the term that was used was Dragyur, meaning the sound or the words that are used to express the meaning. And so the reason for which they use this translating the sound rather than translating the meaning is because they consider that, well, the meaning that we need to convey is already there. It comes from the Sanskrit text and it won't be changed. But what needs to be changed is the expression of that meaning. So the words that express that meaning. And for that reason, they kind of coined the expression Dragyur in order to say translation, which means to translate the sound. And so when yes, and so in this treatise of translation, it is written that when it comes to translating something, and then the translation must possess three different specifications.
네, 다 자동 침보 쌍고 나노는 당보대 가르쳐 차진 가르쳐 거였으나 다 나도가 용된 팅고요레스. 배는 가서다 지난번에 소소 롱바가 게 가래 그 땅에 조고요네. 디가 나도가 노당에 따다마는 고와데 따다 태 말와 나도가 용된 니바든 팅고요레스. 근데 니바데 아니 다 초랑 그 줘야게 용 가래 조요네 용 줘야데 근데 초랑 그 저사 그 난치 그 용대랑 가와 많이 봐 망가버지 구여스 다 돈다 노는 가스마이나 게 까보리라는 저랑 그 나보리스 저야바이는 가스마로 와 근데 망가버데 코나 저랑 그 책간다 조 책세한다 오탄 다제 타니 베조 탄다 여기 탄 가렌다 오지 딱길 조고는 드그리스 이네야 저랑 그 조야 책 돈다데 돈당이네 난치 당 베나 다 메바리스 다 요반다 오지 저야는 가스마로 와다 망가버지 구여레스 자돈이 바데 다 자동 선바데 빼면서 내가 쳔보리 초랑 그 조사가 요르데게 다 타겟팅 세고로 왔다 초랑 그 오디언 롱킹데 다 디그 롱킹데 그 고운도면도 코소가 따따단 란 토운도면도 따고야 돼 빼게 쳔보리 있으나 디 자동 쳔보 쌈데 근데 캡처제 그 눈이 다 메드 마롱버리 있으나 다 대시요레 텐데 다 때니네 당상야 배조 땅에 와이나 텐디 다 개쳔보지 다 캡처를 작은 상도스.
And so the first requirement or specification, the first requirement for a translation is that it must comply with the rules of the language, with the rules of the grammar. And so this means that, for example, if you're translating something, then what you're writing must be written in a grammatically correct language, in your own languages. And because if it is not grammatically correct, people won't be able to get the meaning that you intended to convey to them. And so because of that, this first requirement is there in order to ensure that what is translated is complying with the rules of the target language. Then the second requirement is that it must not be at odds with Dharma in general or with the subject at hand, meaning that if you translate something and you translate white for black, and then you're going against what was originally meant and what is found in the subject matter. And so because, let's say, for example, in the text, if it is said there is no self and you translate by there is self, then obviously you're going against the subject matter. And so this should be avoided because you're again misleading your reader. So this is the second requirement. And then the third one, I think, which is extremely important, is the need to check whether your audience, so the people who are going to read or listen to you, if the audience understands what you wrote, what is being translated. And so the fact of needing to check properly whether the readers are able to understand or not is the third requirement, and I think that is extremely important. And specifically for, and I think this is a requirement that it is absolutely indispensable. And even if it is found in a treatise that is extremely old, if you were to apply it now, I'm sure that it still has all its relevance.
Ati incha nga kata nipa ngoma poji kebje so kon Jordan tikap the negap ka ta chi kase gore ro se gore ta kan temdo di ko di ta hisamba yin tan thama de samba de la tni ta nga so kebje so la chongi be chachin kare yemin de ko la nge to jam ji shege yin.
And so until here, I covered what I wanted to share with you about the rules of translation or the how translations should be produced. And so now I'm coming to my third point, which is what are the qualities required from a translator?
Capture check song of chatting to chishin de ta pensem de pe kitchen body gesta ngak ki joya de so lacha che rag yun ya lacha ke chibu chen mai ba yang chi ka sa cha chen ro yun ya yen da che ke so lama ro che ka tang ne ho se ban de de chi jor go se ro ka la zin ne yong de ba che ti so ya ke chibu mai ba ta ngi ki yen de jor ne ani parabola 핀 토야지 고운도 핀 토야지 조인 삼바게 셈고 나노라 그놈 땅아조 낭바게 깨지 해봐이나 산잡 셈세 요리 따때 마이 제단 파기 깨지 해봐이나 소소 강황 약보세고라 셈바잠부 펜셈걸로 삼노 용인지 코니 끼데 예게 조는다 끼 조는다 가레ን다 오지 당보 조康홍 틱 삼노데 요바이나 아니 조르데 끼 조요는다 예게 조요는다 곰타 파산 참아라 페 마시카 장만도 오지 돈이 근데 소소가 셈바데 솔로 용용야 베 nenga 치보인데 데 강황데 베 계신 분이 사리스.
And so out of all these requirements that a translator should have, the first one I think is to want to be beneficial, want to help the readers for whom he's translating. And so a translator should, ideally speaking, he should not only do his translation because he knows that he's going to get a salary from it, or he should not also translate thinking that, well, I have been asked by this and that person, this and my lama, or this lama asked me to come here and to make this translation, so I'm doing it. So it should not be considered as something that is just to comply with what has been required from you, just like paying taxes. And but on the contrary, if you start translating thinking, oh, what I'm going to translate, it needs to bring some benefit for those who listen to it, and I need to make sure that it's going to be helpful for those who are listening or reading my work. And so this kind of motivation is what is required from the translators. And in Buddhist terms, we can call it bodhicitta, the enlightened mind. Or in ordinary words, we can call it the wish to help others, or the good heart. And so it is this kind of motivation that is required. And once the translator has that mindset and has fulfilled this requirement, then whatever he will do will be very neat, will be very well done, very well organized. And having this motivation also helps the translator to be relaxed while he's working. And so because of that, the motivation of the translator is extremely important.
Tani ta nipa de capture che ta manjua la tambu capture de soso gon khoyo ge chetho ge josa ge ta kere garit na jo yunda ani nyenkhin soda sola ta jo yunda ta ti ge khoran so gon khoyo de chetho ge newa ta kozo ge samno tang ta chekbe ju tang tang gare yime de yungda gare yime to so thola yang pe mase ge tambu jilong 태가 랑 당아디 끼디 시기 요새마 태가 조여봐 마임바 당보 초랑 대적 조고요는다 배는 동파지 조고요는다 다 가리 조고요는다 최종랑 동 같이 조고요는다 대 조카가 혼다 저토데 조사가 초랑 그 오디언스고 왔다 초랑 그 멍빈송사가 요르트서 삼노 동단 코소가 책배주 단단 코소를 가리를 감이 제긴도 다 그소 초랑 야보지 시네 this is the 조야데 배 nenga 쳔보리샤스 근데 조 담보 초랑 코란서 그 삼노 동단다 저소가 책배주 따서 참마 시사와이나 이 초랑 그 직 조바이나야 tani pe mse ko lo ba bo so yang yi dong wa lo ni yang choran ge lo jor yak ba so ko sam no khona ge lo ong ni sem lan ji ka se go re ta mo wi ge na yi jing cha ya yo ba tan de na ba le to yo res
And the second requirement is that the translator takes into account the environment in which he finds himself, and he takes into account also the society in which he lives, and he takes the care of getting to know the people for whom he's translating, his audience, and to see what will correspond to their needs and to their expectations, and how do they think. And so it's really important for us to gather some information and to know all this, for whom, how it's going to benefit, etc. To really gather some experience, and so to be familiarized with the situation beforehand. And it's important to do that, and not just say, okay, I understand what this means, so I'm going to translate right away and then jump into the translation without thinking about anything else. Whether we're translating something small or a very long treatise, it's still the same. We should start by really getting a full understanding of the situation in which we're translating, and what is the object, who is the audience, etc. And so before translating, instead of translating right away, just thinking, oh, I know what it means, we should really get to know the audience. How do they think? What words do they use? What do they like? How can I help them? And so it is really important to know all this and to make all of this extremely clear in our mind, and then only start translating. Because if we do like that, then the way we are going to translate is going to be done in such a way that it's going really to be relatable by the audience, and whenever they read something, they're going to understand what it means, and it will even there is the possibility that the translation becomes so clear and so agreeable that it can feel to the readers like if they're looking at a movie.
then the touch number yege joyuna the yege major bongla yege ta joya yege chorang chache lo ne chorang sam no na lo la chowa ji mandawa ji lo ya wa de so mo win na yi so la chowa mandawa ji che che ne ji jowa yin ya yang de ge pen tho de yo sa ri then the pen ke ki jowa yin la ma che ge songjer yin ya ta songjer de ji ba ka la so ngene chowa dan ni ji pa jo la chowa ti thing ge so ge ji ta hand jans gorda ka lagwe lig namjer yinanda tani che ke je shetan yinanda nga ge devja yinanda pen nga so capture to mang che la karena nga ta ngama Taiwan dan sacha ta do ka la ta capture nga so capture ting go yore capture ting ka la tani lama te chi gawa thwa shen do thwa kare che gado go thwa kare hina ya lama yang gicho me so chene de gawa thwa hina chi namjer mungsi te mi tani capture te yang tagarang chene yang denje gang den ma she de ne korang to jab jan te she tani gawa thwa da gawa namjer sheba ka gawa thwa da te mi doba namjer sheba ka doba nam ba da te mi tani odian nyingin sa sama nyap kare she de na tande chagdwa de indi capture da so yang famous ga lama ga songjer che yonanda korang ga chak de ga ta pena niewa dongan da wechi tapa boba ga lama chi hina niewa da shingam ke tande shegero ta niewa ga tande kangye tande sheba ina yang che soso ga donha ga namban da wechi thoni yang phajo bal chowati tangi te pe nenga chembo yin sare pe nenga chembo ri sha ta kharsanga namjo ga ti chowa de yu ina ya kharsanga gunda de la ani nga di yeshi ga tane koso ke the machinery se ga da chilo pen king de choba da na nga khasan ron ne pen king di shen king de kare lama de sena ta shen king de kare do sena korea ma ji re ya ki jong king de korea ga pomo ji rin do ta ti ndi korang ga shen king de ki de Korea ki ko yo mate khorang ga namjer dan chi shetang da laba yung den de ki majar bang ngarang la throwa mo si le de chi ta ki jor ka se jongkin de Korea mo te chi jordi ka la morang ga namjer ta di khorang di ki jorsa ga lama de ga namjer kare yo ba te na yin ji morang ji tin chi shi yung de tene nga ti ka la kare trans so na o ta nga so bu ga na chi jongkin ke jar mang bu shu ji yo ro ta ndo so lan de ro ji training se go ro ta nga so 직 중단 로티 고데 내가 첨부지리샤 상야가 천나티가 땡땡 랩서 가장 공다 땡땡 나왕 근데 헤로치 말아보 홍랑에 코란 메시지 땅는 던지 차성 던는 거서 마음 발을 캡져던 트레이닝 때 거야 빼내가 첨부리샤세 데를 라인 나랑 있나야 달라마 있는 대가라니 도 나예로 양차강라데 근데 가도고 트로바 가리네 남전다만 때마 찍빠 찍진로 데디 직 삼상랑 가서 캡져이는 직 드라마 세고로다 theater dan do drama dan la chi thaptan ko dan da action da so chetang da jungdar te so go ya de pe ne ga chimbo ji insa de de kebja da so yan pe samno tong go ya pe ne ga chimbo jin tong do si
And so when you're so before you start translating something, what would be good also is that you take the time. You do not start right away, but take the time to read the text that you have from beginning until the end. And then you let yourself be imbued with this text, and then to get the feeling that this text is providing to you. And so to see what kind of feeling, what kind of emotion, what kind of things it gives to you. And then once you have that, then you start actually translating, and you can find a way to actually reproduce that in your translation. Then it becomes, I think that this seems to be something quite important when we are translating, to kind of first get the feeling that the author wanted to convey, and then to apply strategies in order to reproduce that in our translation, not just try to be something, just be technically correct, but also give the same kind of feeling to the readers. And also, what is also extremely important, I think, is that especially when someone is translating orally, then the translator should try also to see how is the speaker moving. Does he make a lot of movement with his hands or not? What are the words that he's using? What are the choices that he's making? What kind of vocabulary he's using? Is it familiar? Is it something very formal or not, etc.? Is he using formal language, or is he making like metaphors and this kind of thing? So just talking casually, and then based on all of that, try to replicate that in your translation. And I think that this is really important. Because otherwise, like we usually find in a lot of occasions, we have the teacher who is sitting on the throne teaching, and then there's the translator who is taking his notes and then translating. And the teacher on his throne, he is just like without showing any emotion, neither of pleasure, neither of sadness or anything, just there without completely blank, without any emotion. And the translator, he just does his job. So he writes, he jots his notes down on the paper, and then produces a speech that is also just as emotionless as the teacher did. And so in this kind of situation, of course, the people who are listening, the audience, they can't feel anything, because when the teacher wants to convey something that is happy, he's not showing it. The translator is not rendering it either. So the readers can't understand that this is supposed to be something that brings joy. And the same thing for sadness or all the other emotions. And so it's this is actually something that is quite common, we see a lot in the Tibetan worlds and with Tibetan teachers, and so I think that trying to convey the feeling and try to convey the gesture and the intonation and all of this through the translation, it's also extremely important, because let's say that you're listening to a teaching, and then the teacher is talking about hell. Yes, so this is kind of subject that you can encounter with Tibetans, because they won't talk about the hell and about the Buddha fields and these kind of things. And so when you're translating what the teacher has to say about the hell, you must really be able to give that emotion to it. The pain and the sadness of the hell must come out through your words. You must be able to render that emotion in order to create that emotion in the reader, in the listeners, and people who are listening to your translation. So it must be something that creates an emotion that has an effect on the listener. And the same when when you're translating something about something happy, the reader, the listener should also have the same emotion through the rendering of your translation. And so this is something that is I find extremely important, and this actually is where I make this link between me being in the church yesterday. I was there in this church listening to a talk by a missionary, and yes, it was just yesterday when Antonia was calling me, and so it happened just at that moment, and it was really a perfect timing. You're going to see why I say that. And so I was there in this church with this missionary. The speaker was a Korean guy, and the translator was a Korean lady. Of course, I don't know the language. But then when this Korean speaker started to talk, he had a lot of expressions. His intonation was very varied, and he just by looking at him moving around and saying things, even without understanding anything of what he was saying, it already gave me some feeling. And I always already at the moment I felt like, wow, okay, this seems to be great. Let's see what the person is going to say, what this means, etc. And so I was already in the expectation of what was going to be translated. And then when this lady started translating, she was also the same. She was also rendering, moving with her body in exactly the same way, saying things in the same kind of intonation. And so when I heard this kind of translation, I felt, wow, this is really what we need. It would be so good, because really then you transmit something. Not only do you give the meaning, but you also give the feeling and what you want to convey through through this speech. And just after that, I was standing there thinking about the situation of Buddhist translators in the Tibetan Buddhist world, because there's quite a lot of translators in Tibetan Buddhist world, but all of them are just like completely apathic people who speak out without any emotion and don't render anything. And the same goes also for most of the teachers. They're just staying there and then saying something that does not bring any feeling. And because of that, of course, then you can't generate any feeling, whatever that feeling may be in the audience. And so this is when I saw the difference, it kind of struck me so hard that I felt that we really need to do something about that, and we really need to make it so that that Buddhist teachers start to create this kind of atmosphere with the way that they talk, etc., with the intonation and everything. And we also need to train translators in the theater, and so to have them learn how to express different feelings and learn how to render this kind of the sadness that they heard in Tibetan, to render it in their language, the happiness that they heard in Tibetan, to render it also. And so I really think that translators should have this kind of skill taught to them in the translation training. And so a little bit of theater training is, I think, extremely important because of that. And so yesterday when I was when Gaunchini called me, I felt like, well, that's exactly what I want to share with the people who are starting to train themselves as translators. And this is really relevant. This is really what we need Buddhist translators to be able to do.
Tatanda ini cik mau bala tanga so nangba sanji be chi temba pe ya inanda cik 단 남바 산지 비치 템바 퍼세디 양고 가서 남바 인 비점생 때네 셴고지는 남바 산지 베긴스 케제데 마리 단 난치데 징직띵 니간라 퍼타바이나 tani tege chiso shibde tang mogi semba la ya pe kase gore ta shibde yung tan pe phendo chimbo te chung yori tende ta pe ya la nga so penkin da wo ta nga so chi shen kin je tang capture chen kin ni ta ge chi kin da wo cha yor ba de ta nga so de so go thola ya tonang zo go ya te pe ne ga chimbo indi mo ba la nga so ta capture yin da chi shen kin ta lama dawa yin da su yin ya nga so di thola ya je pa shi de ba chi bo ma yin be ge yang je mala chwa ti thya ge tende ge number to act se se ra da ti namjer te ya to pe ne ga chimbo yin di to so thola ta capture number pe me sa tong go ya ne ga chimbo je de hyas.
And so in the future, if our aim is to be able to propagate the Buddhist teachings, we are not just thinking or saying that because we are Buddhists and because we have this attachment to Buddhism and we want to spread this religion. It's not that. It's simply because if Buddhist teachings are propagated and spread around the world, then it brings a lot of benefits in generating peace and harmony and happiness around the world. And so it is for that reason that we should want to propagate the Buddhist teachings. And so when it comes to propagating the Buddhist teachings, the most important actors are the one who teaches and the one who translates. Now, those are the main important persons in order to spread the teachings. And so on the one side, I think that in the future we should make sure that the one who teaches does not only kind of say words one after the other, but actually say something with his heart and tries to express something and make the audience feel something through his speech. I think that is really important. And then the same goes for the translator. They should not only just align words one after the other, but also bring some feeling and bring something out of the audience, and then do what we could call nowadays acting or something like that.
Then the something some conjure danger the solar some tang and cheating something correct tangle dosina tang something she yagoda corrams camera correct temper the pashe yagore. Then the something conjure the danger to some tang oh tang so a conjure danger the so jorni no you na pe yabu yosari start tambu de korang that loza number care joyovati koyang Pobakala Namola here, Jibatang, Tachi, Mambuji Son of Iori, Longjun, the Trajun Sierra, that could source the water pay Mazando, Jordan Teche. That is lost like the conjure danger carre in a pendo de Carzan Roya, Canada, in a Tingaso Pogan, Parky number. Monkey Magalone, Parky Tayo at the Cope, no de Canlo Mocalaya, Chitaz, Chenicoya Major de Vando, Main by young Troano, Tita, Parky number, and Regatona, Angel, Pogi Tana, Conjure Danger, Poto Yonzo, the Parky Tana, Chuna Pay, Yaboyosari, that did over the courage in Larison, that Tanzan Yeshig, Beber than Doyan, York, Masi Mara, Shu Mamuchimbo. Then the Nahamo Koran Greek, Georgia, Kariki, Joyona, source, but that did Chabush. That this is a Tansan modern Segurata, Tanrab number 20, Beber Tondade, that Yeshik Sonab Tondade, Chin Malaba Chela, young Sagas of Tansanka, what they were Tony Petutaya and the pet and the Cheosari. The day in the Tangazo Chinabang and Dompat and the Jogoyona, Tan Dompan Donkin, the Chin Dompat, the Lord Devacala, Tani. Chowan or Chin Lamajor, Carelo, and Chictaz, on the Jondo Chicha. Temato Diane Dompa de Parky, so kick and out and when a Zambujo from Holland over there. Yana Sanji Chisondo, Garendo, which is Jova in a did tell the no couple of so Sam Tawa, Donda the Chin Malabajila, so I did in the Jortago, Parky and Jortago. The day in the Tachi. Naranga Kanjar Tenja Mahombala, Chipogan, Kanjar Tenja, the Parky number, Mahom Jortana, Yaboyosari, Sanat and the Tanang and the Yungu. That Rana he paid Nahitina Baganam Junki Joyata in the Kotas Tambo source the Rangi, Sojung Rangi Segura, Chimjo Chisak, Potu Sanda Oche, or Rangi, Namakare, Joyo, these suggestion karizogon techi ta ti sort la kongne tang sang mala chwati ta phagi ga namba tonda de mala pa chi la jortang ge chi kase gore tawa manda wa chi te thoya tende ge jorni da wa chi yo ba ina ko pe beber na gi tende yo na ya bu yo sari sam ba tende chwa tende yung do ta ta so to la china ba ge ma hong bala sam no ta ya pe ne ga chim bu yin saris.
And then also something that crosses my mind when I'm thinking about the texts that are found in the Kangyur and Tengyur, and I'm thinking about that. So here I'm just sharing my thoughts as they come without any order or organization. But yes, what comes to my mind when I'm thinking about the texts that are found in Kangyur and Tengyur is that it would be so nice to have more than one translation of the whole Kangyur and Tengyur, because yes, of course, on the one side we need to have a very accurate and very exact translation that is the source or the basis, the foundation on top of which the transmission of these teachings and these texts can be done from one generation to the next. So this needs to be kept on the one side. We need to have that that translation. We need to, because then the reading transmissions and all the other transmissions are going to be based on that, like we do it now in the Tibetan tradition. But then it would be very nice to have on the side of that translations of, you know, very well-known sutras, such as the sutra of the Good Eon and other texts that are used in the very commonly in Tibetan society, that that would be translated in a way that that speaks to the people, that uses the normal ordinary language. And so because when people read these texts, then they don't understand anything. But if they had a translation that corresponded to the way that they speak today, then when they read it, they would be able to understand it. And so it would be so nice to translate once again all the Kangyur and Tengyur into modern spoken Tibetan, yes, modern Tibetan that can be understood by regular Tibetans. And so the reason for which this kind of thought or this kind of wish comes to my mind in the first place is because I'm thinking about the Bible. If we look at the Bible, and then there's a lot of different translations that serve different purposes that we can find. There are some very accurate, very difficult to read ones, like the Greek translation and the others. And then there are also the very word-for-word translations that exist. And then in a lot of other translations, then these translations are meant to speak, or are meant to touch other type of readers who are not so educated and just want to feel something, to read and understand, and to feel that it's going to inspire them. And so in those kind of translations in the Bible, as we can see, it is possible to not lose the meaning, so to be completely accurate to the meaning, not lose anything, and yet to express oneself in a way that corresponds to the modern reader's abilities. And so this is something that would be so nice to have for all the Buddhist literature that we have in Tibetan. And also it's same like when you're reading some prayers or some rituals, and then you have this Tibetan that you just read through, and then you don't understand anything. So it doesn't give you any effect. It doesn't give you any emotion, and just read through it and you don't get inspired, you don't get anything from it. And just like when you read, for example, the prayer of the good actions, and then, okay, it's a lot of words, it's meant to be very precious, etc. But when you read through it, it doesn't give you anything special, and you just simply don't understand it. But if it was written in a way that you could understand, that actually meant something to you, then the translator could convey something to you, and you could be inspired, feel something either positive, or and then be touched by the meaning of the text of this prayer. And then it would be so much better to do the prayers in that way. And so, this is something that I think is when we are translating, it seems to me, at least this is what I'm thinking right now, is that it would be really nice to have two translations. One translation that's going to be extremely accurate, that is corresponding to, in every possible account to the source text. And so this should be done on the one side, and then on the other, what could be done is a translation that aims at creating a feeling or at conveying the emotion or the effect that the author intended in his original text, in the source text. And so I think that this is something that you could start thinking about right now when you're starting to train as translators, to start thinking that maybe it's good to produce not one translation but instead of one translation, to make two translations, one that is very accurate and the other one that actually speaks or is closer to the readers. And so I think that if we start our training as translators that way, then it would bring positive impact in the long run. And yes, once again, the reason for which all of this occurred to me is that I was comparing how translations are done in the Bible and how they are done from Tibetan.
As tanga keja mangbu shuje koram chene mejo che tene keja ang temba de machine chinamba tese ta nyam ro re tene di ta keja ga dom ro de tane insam yagi yin tene di te number so ke ta ke che hi de la so so kanong ya bo che ya te che tene keja ke da jurbat te son jor to so ka la ya ta kange ten di pe ma se kang chen bo yo re ta ki jo da so le la wo de mari tene tebo ka la yang che so ke ta gang de kar se gare ma chi jo de so kam ni tin la pe ke ning ni se ya jin do ta ma nga ba ye chang ma tho ni tene che man thuni da ju che ya ta so ke jo tang nga so chi xian ken ke la ma ta so ke tang ke jo ni ta nang ba san ji be tem ba tar da ma da per thap da ma thap se kin de nga so grab ni la ra de yo ri ste ni ta nga so pe ma se ke shou ja ne ma ba le tem ba te so te se per tho ya da ma la pen thoya tan de thola ya nga so chama ge shok ja ya tan de internet rang da china ba tan ja ya tan ti ke je hia ko kap tan ra wa de la pe ma se ga wo chong se ne tu ji se tan sia yin la.
And so, okay, so I have said more or less everything that I wanted to share with you without any order and in a way that was very much confused. But now I'm going to try to summarize what I said. So the first thing I think that it's important to keep in mind, yes, I'm sorry. And so because of all this unorganized talk, then most of you must be bored by now. But in order to summarize what I said, first important thing I think is the motivation that you should develop when you're translating. And then the second important point is to keep in mind that that the translation work is not something that is easy, and you will need to put a lot of efforts and then to go through a lot of hardships and to be ready for that. And so this refers to the fifth requirement that translators in the past were needed to have. And finally, please keep in mind that the pair of the master who teaches and the translator who renders in the other language, the pair of these two persons are the most important actors in the propagation and in spreading of the Buddhist teachings. And so without them, then it would be very difficult for Buddhism to spread and to propagate. And so thinking about that, then take upon you all the difficulties and then be ready to provide all the effort that are necessary. And so that's about what I wanted to say. And I'm very happy to have been given this opportunity to share this with you. Thank you very much.
다 최소 최소 차선이야.
the background, choose the chicken half the gains,
라서 다 공부만 자. 양 차선 제시에 차디 간종 만종 참아들 내용도 왔더니 까다.
Khenpo was asking if we still had time or if we're not too late, and I said, well, we went a little bit further, but it's very good. And yeah, and then I want to apologize for my bad translation also. I saw that I added and removed many things since we are talking about that. Yes.
그래서 아니 다양 지마라 지나발아야 나 그거니 샵스 고양다고 당양 지무시 지나발아야 나 그거니 틀렸다는 마음발랑하게 지나발아 샵스 해야던데 노바요 스탠디 지나바 만테네 쇼잡나 뱀마시게 내가 쳔보 캡저도서 뱀 내가 쳔보 차도 스탠디 남바 산제바 데니 기스 담 잠발랑 디당야 남바 산제베 템바 같이 타나야 십데 다 가서는 망토 먹여 망보 진주면서 다 semjin tamji ke mo tamji ke sem ga nang la les marong ba samnong dam dam khone ni ta ta chung yo ro ta ta zo ma len jang ro cha we na dang dang na che so de yan yi len ja go ngo cha ro di ta zo cha ma cha sing de na ji ta ma da sing de ta capture dang chi shin kin ni la ra le yo di ta nga so group ni yo ro ta chi shin kin group ji ta de capture group ji ti ni de ra le de yo de chang zo pe nen ga chen bo ji de de man thane sho jam ne de ko zo lo tho tin ya bu na den tho tin ya bu yo bu tho ni zobol은 토딩 야보 메바이나 아니 소지 장고 지 조르고 삼나야 아니 조보게 샘게 되나야 조보게 네 조보데 가서다 질리 샤타로 샤타 고인데 양 용금도 왔는데 조본 토딩 야보나 되네 양 샘바양 야보 고로다 조본 토딩 요나야 그게 조보 탄탄 요나야 샘바양 강에만 보진 태양도 되네 되게 돌아야 곰라고 데스 잡다 단단다워지 나바이나 샘나야 토딩 요바 zuboyan 토딩 요바 때네 내가 가래야네 라마 야보 용기요디 남아서 디톨아야 효자나로 낭시 때네 쉐이.
And also I would like to say that I would like to be able to serve you, to help you in the future, and so whatever I can do to be of help to you, I'm willing to provide to you, to assist you in any way that I can do, because translators are extremely important when we are talking about spreading the Buddhist teachings. Then the result of spreading the Buddhist teachings will be that in the world, generally speaking, there are less wars, there are less conflicts, etc. And because all of these things actually are the result of how people think, and when they think in a bad way, then they behave in a bad way, which at the large scale results in all those bad situations such as wars, etc. And so spreading the Buddhist teachings has the potential of countering all that, and so it's really important to spread the Buddhist teachings. And so when it comes to spreading the Buddhist teaching, there are two groups of people. On the one side, we have the group of the teachers, and on the other side, we have the group of the translators. And so it's really important that you train as translators, and then you work as translators as well. And so thank you very much for starting this training, and also please take good care of yourself. Take care of your health as well, because taking of our health is really important, because if we want to be able to do something in the long run, and to be able to do something that is as long as that, then we need to make sure that we keep healthy, because our body is made in the end of flesh and blood. And so because of that, if we try to push our body to the limits, then it won't last very long. And because of that, we really need to be able to keep ourselves healthy in order to ensure that we can do whatever we want. So on the one side, the body, and on the other side, yes, it's true that some people can be very healthy, but at the same time, if they're so worried and they have so much mental problems, then they won't be able also to do many things. And so on that side, if you can take care of your mind as well through doing meditation practice, etc., then you will be in a situation where both your body and your mind are healthy and in good condition, which puts you in a situation where you can do whatever you want. And so please take good care of yourself. Thank you very much, Khenpo.
Thank you.